All right, so welcome back, guys. My name is Nisha, and you're watching From Nisha's View. And of course, I'm the Nisha in that. And on this channel, we talk about photography and we talk about fashion. And today, we're back on the photography side. Now, a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, no, my last photography video, I talked about how I take my headshots and my setup of, the headshots and the lights and everything like that. So today I decided that I'm gonna go into more of the equipment that I use. I didn't really go into detail last video of the equipment. So stay tuned and we're gonna talk about the equipment. All right, hold on. Okay, so today we're gonna talk about the equipment that I use. I realized in that video, and if you haven't watched it, definitely watch it. I'll link it so you can see what I'm talking about. When I said we talked about it before in my last video, it's there. Just the headshots, my whole headshot setup of how I take my headshots for myself and for clients. But today, in today's video, we're going to talk about the equipment that I use and the setup that I use for the equipment. So on the first thing that we're going to be talking about, and I have my computer here so I can do this voiceover and make sure I'm telling you guys the right thing because I can never remember what I'm talking about because I talk so much. Anyway, so here we go. So first up is me showing you the trigger. So the trigger that I use is a flash point trigger. Now the thing about triggers is that you have to make sure that they are compatible with your camera, and meaning that there are certain triggers that go with certain brand or type of camera that you use. I use a Canon, so I have to make sure that whatever trigger that I'm going to use to operate my flash, my off-camera flash, my speed light, or whatever that I'm using, I have to make sure that the trigger that I'm using is compatible with that brand. And this one is definitely compatible, of course. It's a Canon, it's a flash point, but it's made specifically for the Canon camera. And here I'm just showing basically how the trigger works, and you can control your flash and the amount of the power of your flash with this trigger. And the transmitter, however you want to call it, transmitter, trigger, whatever. But here I'm just showing you how I control it, and there's a dial on it where you can turn it, and it just allows you to increase the power or decrease the power. Here I'm just going through how you can change the power of your light by controlling the trigger. So this is what is going to be talking to your light and your flash. And this trigger, you can change, you can turn on the modeling light. You can do a lot with this trigger. Now the next thing that I'm showing is the Godox 8200 Pro. I mentioned this in my last photography video on how my setup is for my headshots. But here I'm showing you that this pocket flash, they call it a pocket flash. It's much powerful than your typical speed light. So this is a 8200, and it like I said, it just gives a lot more light than your regular speed light would give. And this is a Godox and flash point are interchangeable. It's just a different brand, but it's basically the same thing. It's basically the same thing. And so here I'm just showing how you can change. Again, you can change the power of your flash using the trigger. Now the most important thing here is that you're going to have to change your channel. So the trigger, you can set up different channels. So let's say my key light or the big light in front of me is on channel A. Then you have to make sure that you're changing the A make sure that you're on the right channel in order to change the power of your flash. And here I always use the pocket flash or my second light, which I usually use for like a hair light or like a side light or to light up the backdrop. I usually go with that being my B channel. So you just have to make sure that you're on the right channel on your transmitter or your trigger in order to control the power of your flash. Now here is my main flash, what I use for my main light or my key light. I use a Flashpoint Explorer 300 Pro. I showed this also in my last video. But now I'm just going to go over how, I didn't show last time, how the trigger actually controls the light. So here I'm just showing you again how the trigger or the transmitter actually works in, conjunction with the light, and how you can control that. Control your flash power with the trigger. And this light, I like it. I mean, some people have, some people don't like Flashpoint or Godox, but to me, it works. It works for me, and I like using it, and I get good results with it. So it works for me. Now, more than likely, I may upgrade to something else later in the future, but for now, this works. This works fine. I mean, like for maybe sports or something like that, you may want a faster light that recycles better, which would probably be a more expensive light. But if you're doing good with what you have, then by all means stick with it and keep going. All right, so next up, my last video, I didn't talk about the lens that I used, that I mainly use for headshots. Actually, I did there is a previous video of the lens that I use for portraits, and I'll link that as well somewhere so you can check that out. But my favorite portrait lens of all time is the 85mm. I love that lens for any type of portrait work that I do, headshots especially. I just love it. I just love it. And I'm a prime girl, so most of the time I'm going to have a prime lens. I'm going to shoot with prime lens because, for one, usually your prime lenses have a lower f-stop where you can stop down pretty low, which means you're going to let in a lot of light. Anyway, so yeah, I use the Canon R6 for my camera, and I use the 85mm for mainly my headshots. Now, I also use the Canon 35mm focal length for headshots, depending on the space that I'm in. So like if I'm using it here, I don't have a lot of space to work with. I'm kind of confined to a particular area. And if the model or my client or whatever wants, and I want to do like maybe a waist up shot, which is not your traditional headshot. We talked about that in my last video. But I like to switch things up and give my client a little bit of variety. So I'll do a little bit of portrait style headshots and do some things that are kind of waist up or maybe knee up or above the knee up. And I use the 35, majority of the time I will use the 35 for that. Now, next up is the tethering cable. The tethering cable, I love to tether, and I talked about this in my last video as well, is that tethering allows you to see what's going on, right? And especially if you're doing your own headshots, you can actually, see what you're doing, say, look at it. And then the clients kind of like it too. They find themselves looking at themselves, and I have to tell them, back to me, focus, focus back. Come on, look at the camera, stop looking at yourself and look at me, okay? But it really does help. with tethering, when you tether, it does help you, and it does help, you know, your client or your talent or your model. It helps them to see what they're doing in real time and see, okay, so let's move this, you know, let's move your hair, let's move, you know, your clothing, let's fix that a little bit, you know, slouch, you know, sit straight up, or move your hand this way, move your head that way. You know, it's very convenient to tether. Tethering, I definitely recommend it. And this is just a cable that I got from Amazon, more than likely. And I think it's a fast gear tether. I'll link everything that I have here. I will link it below, and you can, you know, check it out. Now, of course, like I've said in previous videos, of things that you definitely need, the gear that you need as a beginner photographer, are extra anything, right? So you need extra batteries, it's extras. So here I'm just showing that I have extra batteries for my camera and for the flash. So my flash equipment, being that they are, you know, kind of in the same family of Flashpoint and Godox, you can use the same battery for the flash equipment. So I get extra. I always buy an extra battery for everything. I buy extra battery for my cameras. I buy extra batteries for my flashes, because you just never know. All right, so next up here, I'm just showing how me and my assistant, which is my husband, set up the backdrop. I mentioned this in my last video for setting up headshots. Of the backdrop that I use is a Savage backdrop paper, and this is just us, you know, setting up the equipment. Yeah, it usually doesn't. Sometimes it takes two people, but most of the time I just have him to help me, because, you know, it's just quicker for two people to do it, because you have to raise up the sides, and if you're just one person, then you got to go over here, screw that in, then go on this side, screw that in. But when you have help, it is so much better when you have help, when you have good help. And he's good help. He's good help. I put the dimensions of the paper because it is pretty wide. So yeah, so that's basically it for today. That's all I wanted to come on and just share, that specific, you know, information, the specific equipment, and just go over it a little bit more in depth of why I use it, why I use that particular equipment, and in my headshots, and basically pretty much for anything that I do, any of my shoots that I have. I have some more behind the scenes and setup and explanations, or explaining how I do headshots. If you love to talk about photography, I love to talk about photography. So let's keep the dialogue going in the comments. And yeah, so until next time, I'll talk to you later.